So, but I actually, on many levels, disagree with this idea because when you read the Gospel of Mary Magdalene or other Gnostic Gospels, which are the Gospels which were rejected and not
Yeah.
accepted to the canonical Bible, Mary Magdalene is not portrayed as necessarily as a mother of Jesus's children, because she's portrayed as his most advanced disciple, which is an apartment, which is a little bit different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think, and before, if I may tell you, that before you said our Catholic Church does this, that's true, but at least Catholic Church had divine feminine.
Yeah.
And because the Protestants never had any divine feminine, because they never had a Virgin Mary, right? She was kind of on a side, like existed, but of no importance. Like in Catholicism, she's big.
Yeah.
So they started to pose the same thing on Mary Magdalene that Catholics had on Virgin Mary, which means she's basically the mother of Jesus's children.
Prove to me that you are alive.
And we are recording. What's really good, everybody? Welcome to the one, the only Prove to Me that You're Alive podcast, which is a LiteCast. I am your host, NazareN. Now, of course, this is the only show in the entire world that challenges your perception on reality and existence itself and gives you that mental kick in your spiritual gut so you can start grasping for air of information with the same enthusiasm just like you did when you were a little kid. Today, I'm super excited. Like, I'm all over the place, man, because I'm super excited to introduce to you our guest today. In order to introduce her, I want to say a couple of words. A lot of you know that throughout time, throughout humanity's history, if you will, it's always been hard to go against the status quo. It's always been not easy to go against the world's dogmas, if you will. You have to be a sort of a warrior, a fighter, to be willing to accept your own truth and then follow that truth and make it make sense not only for yourself but for everyone else. And today we have that kind of a guest. Now obviously I'm going to read her credentials that I got from the internet, but obviously she's going to tell us about everything. I'm super excited, super humble, super privileged. Today we have Joanna Kujawa. Obviously, she's an author, a scholar. She's a spiritual detective, which I want to really hear about that one. She has received her bachelor's and master's from the Pontifical Institute of Medieval Studies at the University of Toronto, Canada, and her PhD from the Monash University, Melbourne, Australia. She's also the creator and the host of the YouTube channel, obviously, Dr. Joanna Kujawa Spiritual Detective. She is an author of three amazing works, and I encourage everyone to go and get it. Obviously, all the links will be in the description. One of her books is called The Other Goddess, Mary Magdalene and the Goddess of Eros and the Secret Knowledge, Alien Goddess, UFOs, AI, the Goddess of Ascension, and the journaling to manifest a lost goddess in your life. So once again, today we have the one, the only, the very exceptional Joanna Kujawa. I'm going to give you a round of applause. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. And thank you for this wonderful introduction. Just to correct something, the journaling is not available anymore. I just removed it. So,
Okay.
but the way the internet works is just right.
It
It's
might be
just
out there, but I
yeah,
think I think I think
yeah.
it's gonna add more mysticism to it. But I do have to say, like on the Proof to Me Their Life podcast, obviously we like to have people a lot of times, that we disagree with, so we can go back and forth, get different people's opinions. But then when I started to look into your work, I'm like, wow, today is a treat because I agree with so much, that you are out there writing and teaching about. And again, I'm super excited. Thank you so much for doing this. So Joanna, we like to start the podcast, in short or in long. If you could tell us about yourself. Some people think that this is a cliche question, but I think the way that someone answers that question tells a lot about who the human being is. And I know the NazareN fans love to hear, the backstory. So if you could, take as much time if you like. Where are you from? What was your childhood like? Maybe what were some of your heroes, and when did you first start feeling some sort of information come into your life that was going against what we call the status quo? Thank you.
Oh, that's a fascinating question. So first of all, I will skip all my credentials, academic credentials, because you already explain all of this, right? So when I speak about myself, I would say, okay, so I was born in communist Poland, in the city called Lublin, which is on the eastern edges of Poland. And I wanted to live, not necessarily for any other reasons, but I just wanted to explore the world. It was this kind of hunger, and I almost knew that I have to leave the place to find my destiny. So that was a very strong feeling. But the times were unusual, and we were still then living behind the curtain, iron curtain. So all I had was a borrowed suitcase and 20 American dollars,
Wow.
because this is what we're allowed to buy on the black market. And this is what we could take. And for me, $20 was lots of money. I didn't realize that it's
Yeah.
nothing. And my friend arranged for me to an invitation to Paris, which was this kind of invitation that somebody says that will take care of you when you're there, just to convince the communist government, when in fact I knew I would be on my own, right? Because it was just to get me out of the place. So I went to Paris, and it was, it was beautiful in a sense, because I adored so many artists and writers who lived in Paris. And a philosopher, for example, Henri Bergson, who is talking about Elan Vital, which is this kind of Shakti or life energy, and Simone de Beauvoir, and Jean-Paul Sartre, and Modigliani, and all of these people that I loved. So I wanted to be there. So I was there. But and this what I think you can give credit to kind of youthful enthusiasm, because the times were actually, it was really hard. I lived in a small mansard, and I was like babysitting for a living, but I was in complete ecstasy all the time, because I was in Paris,
Right.
and I had a French friend, a girlfriend who was helping me somehow. She introduced me to interesting people and so on, right? But financially I was on my own, and you can imagine what you can do with $20. So I think that I have learned that you can sometimes jump into the unknown, and you are taken care of, because
Yeah.
I was like the proverbial fool in the tarot cards, or the innocent child going into the world, because I was 19. I had 20 American dollars and a borrowed suitcase, and here I am in the city of my dreams. However, the city of my dreams is also very hierarchical, and I realized very quickly, after about a year and a half, although I had a fantastic time, that it would be very difficult for me to do my work. And I had this calling, that I needed to know ancient traditions,
Wow.
but my calling was wisdom. Okay, first I thought it was knowledge, but now I make the distinction between knowledge and wisdom, which is very important for me.
Yeah.
So I felt like if there was I knew that I couldn't stay then, because they were starting to, check, whether you can stay here or not. There were visa issues. So I went to American embassy, but they didn't want me. Because who wants a person who has a 1 year of philosophy at university behind her, right? You want accountants,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You want businessmen and
Yeah.
engineers. And then my friend said, why don't you go to a Canadian embassy? And I thought, like, I looked, at the documentation, and I thought, there's no way they want me, right? So instead, because so then I wrote a letter to the ambassador, and whoever this man is, if he's still alive, eternal gratitude, because I told him I am this person, I have these big dreams, I want to be a famous writer, and I will do all I can, and get any job I can. And he invited me for an interview,
Wow.
and it was just a handwritten letter in English. And I said, look, at that stage I was speaking also good French. Now I not so good because I haven't used it for 20 years.
Yeah.
But and I said, and I speak both languages, English and French, which are both languages are, Canadian.
International.
Yes, but also in Canada, they are bilingual, right?
Right, right.
So, and I got a visa. And I got a visa after conversation with him when I told him about my dreams and aspirations and what I want to do. He gave me, visa for permanent residence. So I went to Canada and I got my degrees. I was working a little bit, but I was offered a scholarship to get a PhD, but I was too exhausted mentally then. And also I felt like this hunger for the world, for travel. I wanted to be a writer. Wasn't sure if I want to be, 100% academic, was very strong. And so I declined it. Also, by then I was in a relationship with a Canadian man, and he wanted me to become a high school teacher. So this didn't work out because I couldn't get a job as a high school teacher. And eventually, so just to make a long story short, I went to Malaysia to teach there, and a Monash University in Asia, which I had lots of spiritual experiences. I was tripping over gurus, let's put it this way. By tripping, I don't mean LSD. I meant I was meeting gurus everywhere and learning a lot from them, which changed my life. And then eventually, after a year of teaching there, Monash University headhunted me and offered me a PhD for free if I become a lecturer for them.
Wow.
So, and then since then, I lived in Australia. And went through my own spiritual journey and wrote the books that you've mentioned, The Other Goddess, which is mostly about Mary Magdalene, but also the lineage of priestesses and goddesses that I believe were suppressed, which by suppressing it, I believe that mainstream religions and all kinds of mainstream narratives were suppressing a particular form of consciousness.
Yeah.
Okay. And this idea I carried also to my new book, which is just out, Alien Goddess, when I discuss also AI and UFOs in this book, and more about mythologies of a goddess, because I believe that this mythologies of a goddess actually warn us about the situation that we are now with respect to artificial intelligence, because they speak of a loss of a particular part of consciousness in humanity, which will lead us to, darkness. So this is like as short as I could be.
That was wonderful. We're gonna get into all of that. Again, this is so wonderful. Your journey is crazy. That just sounds like you're just such a young woman. You've done all of these different things, traveled, and for a lot of people that don't know, because I was born and raised, partially in the Soviet Union and then in the independent Ukraine. Considering like the whole world and comparing it to what the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc was back in the day, we sort of lived in like this utopia, if you would say. I'm not saying like pretty, flowers and bees and everything, but I mean like we were so disconnected from a lot of the things that the Western world had to offer, like the drugs and the prostitution and the murder and this and that. Like it was so it's crazy for this young girl to go out and go on this crazy journey. And I'm so glad that you talk about this, sacred feminine and about this female energy consciousness, because it's something that I've been pushing with my wonderful wife. Shout out to Romania, a poet, because we've been trying to bring the Slavic Vedas to the Western world. And I've always been saying that a shift happened about 2,000 years ago where the sacred masculine started to suppress the feminine. So I definitely want to hear, everything that, and obviously you're a scholar. I have a question for you before we get into, all the juicy stuff. I'm wondering, because even though you lived in a Soviet bloc, Poland, but Poland has always been obviously a Catholic country. My question is, when did first originally all this, shift inside of you started to happen? Did you come from a very Catholic strict family? Was there a lot of talk of spirituality? Like, how did it happen with you? Was there a certain point in your life, or did it happen gradually where you wanted to seek this knowledge? Thank you.
So yes, so that's a very good question actually, and it goes deep into my childhood. And yes, I was brought up as a Catholic, so in a very traditional way, right? In a very ritualistic way, and all the prayers and so on. So I went through all the stages of being baptized, confirmed, and so
Yeah.
on. So and in Poland, however, it was a very so I was exposed to spirituality, but very traditional spirituality. However, as far as divine feminine is concerned, Catholicism in Poland was very interesting because actually the main deity being worshipped was Virgin Mary.
Mhm.
Okay, in fact, for Catholics, she was called like the Queen of Poland. So I was exposed to this very powerful image of divine feminine. However, once I started to grow up, I remember going to a church, and a Baroque church in my hometown in Lublin, a beautiful church, and the images of Virgin Mary everywhere. But I also noticed that on a side in the nave there was a painting of this other woman, Mary Magdalene, and that she was always very close to Jesus, and
Right.
it but she was kind of bad, but she was also
Right.
interesting. Right? So later in my life, but much later in my life, after many adventures, I started to look into Mary Magdalene, and I realized that what we were taught about Mary Magdalene is completely untrue.
Yeah.
And I'm talking from a scholarly point of view, not from and I don't want to insult anyone,
Right.
but not like I'm channeling something.
Mhm.
Okay, it was like I did actual research, so I realized, for example, that Mary Magdalene was not called a prostitute until the 6th century. Okay,
Right.
but there is no biblical actually evidence for her being a prostitute and so on. So I started to look into this other divine feminine, which later led to my original book, The Other Goddess, Mary
Mhm.
Magdalene and the Goddesses of Secret Knowledge, of Eros and Secret Knowledge.
Mhm.
So because it all kind of originated there, but it was a process. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like I thought, like, oh, this is interesting, and but I've done so many things in my life uh, but this kind of came much later, but it was originated in Poland.
That's extremely interesting, and obviously I want to get into all of that. Yeah, and it's the first time that I heard about this theory about Mary Magdalene actually being a very close disciple to Christ was obviously through Dan Brown's work of
Mm.
the Da Vinci Code and then Angels and Demons and stuff. I remember I was maybe 15, 16 when I first heard the theory, and it was so captivating. It made a lot of sense to me how Christianity, especially the Catholic Church, how they made us believe that not only is the woman not equal to Adam, but it was the woman was taken out of Adam's rib, and all of these different stories. And I always kind of ask the men that still try to maintain that dogma. Is my question is always like, well, how have we been doing since men have taken over the world, like.
Yeah.
and
Do
and
you
and
like where you are, right?
right, like are you happy with all the conflicts and the war and all of this? But anyway, what I'm really curious about, and I want to kind of go over your very impressive resume, but what is a spiritual detective? Please, I'm so
Mm.
curious about this.
Mm. So spiritual detective, because I think that our spiritual detective, so it is a detective that investigates spirituality. All right. So for example, for me, the first investigation was really about Mary Magdalene. Like, what's the truth behind it?
Mm,
Right. So this was when I decided to call myself spiritual detective, because it's a form of investigation, and every investigator or detective has to be very thorough, right?
wow.
So I decided that I'm going to look into scholarly sources, but I'm also going to look into sacred script that were written about Mary Magdalene, such as like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which I studied and learned from for over 20 years now.
Wow.
Okay, so I deeply depend on somebody else's interpretation, but I also added to his interpretation, which is Jean-Yves Leloup. He's a French scholar and a former priest, and actually is priest now in the Orthodox tradition. So this is what it means. And then when I kind of moved from Mary Magdalene to other kind of famous but forgotten,
Mm-hmm.
archetypes of the feminine, but real women.
Prove to me that you are alive.
And other goddesses. And then it led me to my current book, Alien Goddess, when I think actually the reason why we are here and why people are surrendering their mad to artificial intelligence, because we completely forgot this suppressed part of consciousness, which is available for both women and men.
Mm-hmm. What's really interesting to me is there's a lot of these sort of like what we call in American conservative Christian, YouTubers and what they call themselves, scholars and things like that, and they always kind of try to portray, well, a woman is, she needs to carry the baby, so basically she's like an oven, so she needs to carry the baby in the oven, and then she gives birth, and then she needs to keep the household. So my question is always to these men is like, well, do you think that your children are just growing up like what are they doing at home while the wife is cleaning and cooking, and it makes zero sense, that obviously the woman was in this household in order to bring up these children, in order to be the carrier of wisdom, in order to pass to your children, so they're not just running wild throughout the world. Again, these are going back to what I think and what I know. Now, from your perspective, everything that you have learned, obviously you are a scholar. What is the story of Mary Magdalene that the world got wrong? And how right was Dan Brown in what he portrayed in his work?
Okay, so first of all, Dan Brown was not the first. There was another, actually, Protestant writer. Her name is Margaret Starbert, and she wrote a very famous book, A Woman with an Alabaster Jar.
Wow.
And no, I think so. I think this is the title. And he was reading this book, and he decided to make a detective story about it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the idea of her, so he basically popularized this idea,
Yeah.
right? So, but I actually, on many levels, disagree with this idea, because when you read the Gospel of Mary Magdalene or other Gnostic Gospels, which are Gospels which were rejected and not accepted to the canonical Bible, Mary Magdalene is not portrayed as necessarily as a mother of Jesus's children, because she's portrayed as his most advanced disciple, which is an partner, which is a little bit different.
Yeah.
Because I think, and before, if I may tell you, that before you said our Catholic Church does this, that's true, but at least Catholic Church had divine feminine.
Yeah.
And because the Protestants never had any divine feminine, because they never had a Virgin Mary, right? She was kind of on a side, like existed, but of no importance. Like in Catholicism, she's big.
Yeah.
So they started to pose the same thing on Mary Magdalene that Catholics had on Virgin Mary, which means she's basically the mother of Jesus's children.
Yeah.
And in my book, The Other Goddess, I said there is no evidence for this. The evidence in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, or even in the Gospel of Thomas, and especially in the Gospel of Philip, is that she was the most advanced disciple of Jesus. And she's also called in the Gospel of Philip his koinonos, which basically means his very special partner.
Wow.
Okay, so she was a partner, and also in other, which we can go different gospels, when other disciples are jealous of our relationship. It means Jesus is in Mary relationships for two reasons. One of the reason is that she got his most esoteric teachings that he shared with her that they didn't get. Okay, so that's a part of jealousy. And the second part is because so for example, in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, there is a line when one of the disciples says, Peter, you know that he loved him more than other women.
Wow.
Peter, you know that he loved her more than us also.
Wow.
Or in the Gospel of Philip, Jesus used to kiss her. Okay, so there was a relationship there that and I hope I'm not upsetting anyone here, which was probably of erotic kind, but also she was primarily his disciple to whom he conveyed his most esoteric teachings.
Wow.
So I do not really agree necessarily with this premise that she was the mother of his children, because maybe she was, but it was not the prime objective of our relationship.
Right.
they were in a very close relationship, probably of very erotic kind also, and then but very conscious erotic. You know what I mean? Like.
Right, of course.
Yeah, and also, he conveyed the most advanced teachings to her. And throughout the Gnostic Gospels, there is this thread that, the disciples, especially Peter, who is like a prominent, the first disciple in all Christianity, when he gets really angry, at the place of Mary Magdalene in Jesus's life.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I'm glad that you said that about Catholicism. We have not far where we live in Pennsylvania, a kind of a carbon copy of Częstochowa, and
Yeah.
yeah, my wife and I was just there last week. So I'm very glad that you reminded me of that, because a lot of times I could be very bashful towards the Catholic Church. So thank you for reminding me of that. But obviously, we know that and you can correct me on this, that the Council of Nicaea happened, and originally there were, maybe some people say, like over 80 gospels, even such a thing as a gospel of Judas.
Yes.
So uh, again, from your scholarly work, what do you think went behind the mentality of this shift happening, and putting the woman on the back burner, as far as the universal dogma goes, with be it Christianity or Islam, and the way we have been perceiving and forgetting about the divine feminine?
That's a very good question. And I would say that before you mentioned that it's about 2000 years, I would say it is probably about 4,000 or more when
Wow.
it was going on. So, for example, in Alien Goddess, I explore the Minoan civilization, which is on Crete in Greece,
Yeah.
which is a very ancient civilization, as old as Egyptian civilization. But it is, European civilization in which, women were equal with men, and the so-called Eleusinian mysteries, which goddess Demeter was initiating people to basically take them expansion of consciousness and teaching them that there is no death, or the death is just a passage, and so on. This civilization, where women and men were equal, was destroyed by Greek invasions. Okay.
Wow.
So by Greek invasions, so once Greeks started to invade around like 1200 BC and so on, they destroyed the civilization. And there are theories that, for example, Troy, right, the city of Troy, it was the last vestige of the civilization, because the civilization had a center at Knossos on Crete, but there were other like outposts, right? So the Iliad is really about the destruction of other civilization by the Greeks, who introduced, and I know because I also grew up loving Greek goddesses and gods, so it's not easy for me to say, but the truth is that this is then when they started to introduce this other form of consciousness, which is very logical, mathematical, and actually they came up with the concept of techne, where the word technology comes from. Okay, so this started much earlier, and the question is why? Where did why it happened? And it's very difficult to know why. Some scholars like Elaine Pagels, for example, who looked into it a lot, especially in Christianity, she cannot find the answer for this either. Everybody is speculating. Also, at the beginning, in the first century in Christianity, there were some sects that actually had women bishops and so on. And then, once it got organized into like more traditional or an organized religion, all of this innovation got lost into, so it becomes a kind of religions of it is acceptable to the Romans. You know what I mean? So that's a much longer story, and we are still looking why. But I think it is less important why, but rather more important that there was another form of consciousness, and we're represented by women. They are always on the fringes of traditional religions, and usually in esoteric kind of fringes, right? Whether it's in Hinduism, whether it is in Christianity, right? And that we can recover this. So sometimes the better question is, how can we recover this wisdom so we can change the direction of our civilization in a more, sane way, rather than why it happened? Because why, we may never know.
Right. Right. That's a great point. Yeah, and throughout my long journeys and travels, and something that I'm trying to advocate on the channel is what I have noticed is that there was a time that indigenous, what I call indigenous people of all of the worlds, sort of had this knowing, or as we
Yeah,
say, the Vedas in
yeah,
in Slavic or in Hindu. And then obviously this shift happened, and you make a great point that maybe it's not as important to why it happened. I tend to maybe think maybe something, Kali Yuga had something to do with it, and us galactically having some sort of a shift. But again, you make a great point that it's not that important. I just want to touch on it just for a little bit more on the whole Mary Magdalene story, because I think it's important with the way it's been portrayed, and the way the shift happened worldwide. Us drifting into this, more like you said, masculine, maybe logical, techno civilization. What do you think about the idea of this whole Merovingian bloodline? I know you said that maybe it's not as important if she bore the children of Christ, but
mhm.
just to get your scholarly opinion, what do you think about the idea of the Merovingian bloodline, and the stories that it might be in France and so on and
Mm.
so forth?
Okay, so so France is a little bit separate from Merovingian, because there is
Hmm.
some, and I can discuss it in a moment, evidence that perhaps Mary Magdalene eventually, after 12 years, went
Hmm.
after the resurrection to France. And there
Hmm.
is a very strong tradition there. I have a slightly different theory that I will share with you later. But as far as Merovingians, I think that it's personally, I do not believe so, although I know that lots of people will
Hmm.
be upset with this. And there are a couple of reasons. This was a very insignificant dynasty. For
Wow.
me, Jesus or Mary Magdalene is about spiritual enlightenment,
Right.
right? So what did they do? Not much,
Hmm.
just regular warriors and kings like anybody else in Europe at the same time.
Hmm.
Also, between the time of arrival of Mary Magdalene and Merovingians is about 400 years.
Yeah.
So people kind of skip. That's why I really don't, this kind of fact, right?
Hmm.
So this is Merovingians. I think that it's a good story, and sure, some writers may go with this, but I think that this is what happened to Mary Magdalene. Okay, I think that there is a strong evidence that 12 years after resurrection, she left the Holy Land, and there are different versions. So this is just one of the versions, right?
Hmm.
So, and then when she eventually went with some of the other disciples, including I think Lazarus and some
Hmm.
other two women and somebody else, and landed on the southern coast of France, which is a now very strong tradition, right?
Hmm.
Which is celebrated, and apparently a tribal woman called Sarah, Black Sarah,
Hmm.
saw them and invited them to the land. And the Gypsies claim, or the Romani claim, that Sarah was their tribeswoman,
Right.
right? Of a princess or shamanic woman. So there's a very strong uh, 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 tradition there.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, I think I was just kind of, I
Don't
think,
worry. Yep. Yep. Yep.
tradition there.
Hmm.
So, however, what happened for the 12 years, I have a different story version, if you don't mind me to explain, which I
Please.
explain in this other book,
Hmm.
The Other Goddess, so people don't get confused. So, which is really about Mary Magdalene. So,
Hmm.
and this is kind of scholarly research, right?
Yeah.
So I said, okay, so it was probably not safe for her to stay in the Holy Land because,
Right.
persecution and so on. And then I learned from another scholar that in Alexandria, Egypt, which was the scientific center and spiritual center of the Roman world, and any world at that time, the Western
Hmm.
world, there was a group of people who called themselves Therapi or Therapete, which means spiritual healers.
Hmm.
And then they were this group of people which was allowing women, highly spiritually intellectually developed women, into their circles. It was a
Hmm.
circle of philosophers. So I thought that it made perfect sense for me that if she had to go somewhere, by she I mean Mary Magdalene, she would go there. And
Hmm.
why? Because there is also a strong evidence that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had a connection to a sect in the Holy Land called the Essenes,
Yeah.
right? And this group, the Therapeti, from Alexandria, were in a strong connection with the Essenes.
Wow.
Okay, so I thought this is just a kind of detective work. So this is you ask
Mhm.
about spiritual
Mhm.
detective. So I was thinking like that was a perfect place to go to for her, right? Because
Mhm.
there was already connection between the Essenes and the Therapeutai. Alexandria was like the most open-minded place in the world at that stage, and they
Mhm.
invited women, and she, but so I think that for at least for 12 years she lived in Alexandria, and perhaps after she left for France. However, when I was investigating Alexandria, I was looking for a woman who could be, Mary Magdalene that lived at that time, right?
Mhm.
So, for example, I found this information about this woman called Mary the Jewess, Mary the Prophet, or Mary the Prophetess, or Mary the Alchemist, which
Wow.
was mentioned in the 3rd century by a very famous and definitely historical figure, Zosimus of Panopolis,
Mhm.
who said that she was the first kind of woman who shared, the knowledge of spiritual alchemy, and she could do it because she was not fully Egyptian, and Egyptian born people were not allowed to share the secrets of mysteries of Egypt.
Mhm.
And then, just to make another connection against spiritual detective,
Mhm.
Panopolis, which is now modern city of Akhmin, is where the Gospel of Mary Magdalene was found.
Wow.
Okay, so it's a fantastic, detective
Yeah.
work. So I really enjoyed it. So I thought, okay, so maybe she was this person, Mary the Jewess, which is also known as Mary Prophetess because of her
Mhm.
great spiritual gifts. Okay, and she lived, and there is evidence for it because I check in the, in National Library of, I think it is called Israel.
Mhm.
That Mary the Jewess is a historical figure.
Oh
And
wow.
it's more interesting because some sources mention that the reason why Mary Magdalene, who actually was a woman of uh, financial means, and she was a daughter of a businessman, all
Mhm.
right, she was not a prostitute for sure, but the kind of uncleanness of her came from the fact that she was not purely Jewish. She was because he was Egyptian who married a Jewish woman, so she
Mhm.
was half and half. So it would also connect to the fact that Mary the Jewess was, not fully Egyptian.
Wow. Wow.
So I don't know. So this is just my theory, and I had lots of fun with it. And there is actually, there are kind of breadcrumbs there. And maybe after that, she went to southern France. I do not know, but
Listen,
I,
I'm
Mhm.
sorry for interrupting you. I feel like a little kid in the candy store right now. I'm telling you, like this is what this podcast is all about. I'm learning so much, and you keep saying like I don't want to upset anybody, but look, this is incredible stuff that you are giving us. These myth bustings I think are very important, and I've been blessed to talk to some of the most impactful people in the world right now. You really stand out, and I can really see that this is something that you definitely dedicated most of your life to. This is incredible stuff. You have to come back like a million more times because I just want to
My
ask you
pleasure.
so many different things. And again, I'm so thankful for you just from a human being standpoint. Just to touch on it a little bit more, because obviously I have you here not for such a long time, and I want to ask you some important stuff. um you mentioned resurrection. You yourself, how do you, again, based on your knowledge and everything, was there a resurrection, and is it important?
Prove to me that you are alive.